Hey, what's up, Cerebralites? It's me, the Cerebral Diva. It is Monday, March 20th, 2017, and I am here with the Real Housewives of Atlanta review. Now, if you're like me, a Sunday isn't a Sunday unless you get your fill of the Real Housewives of Atlanta. And last night was a very interesting episode. I've been listening to some of the other reviews, and a lot of people are talking about how long this season has been, and I'm actually sort of appreciative of an extended season. Being that Nene isn't there, I kind of think that the producers were determined to milk it for all it was worth. Make sure that they got every single cent that they've invested. So they're giving us episode after episode after episode, which is really cool because there are some things that are coming up, especially in next week's episode between Kenya and Matt, that it seems like relatively new information for me. So I'm really excited after seeing the previews for next week to see what happens in that particular relationship. So last night was it was interesting because a lot of people have a very strong dislike for Kenya. I happen to be a Kenya fan. I think Kenya is misunderstood. Kenya to me is a lot like Donald Trump in the sense. I know that's a bad comparison or a bad analogy, but excuse me. I think she's a lot like Donald Trump in the sense that Donald Trump is a very well-to-do man who's been well-to-do all of his life, who's pretty much had every luxury that life could afford you. But the one thing that he has been unable to attain is likability. And for whatever reason, his money hasn't been able to buy him likability. So all the riches and all the money just cannot make people like you if you just are genuinely unlikable. And when it comes to Kenya, I don't think that she's necessarily unlikable. I think she tries too hard to be liked. And she's slightly socially awkward. So sometimes she says things that are slightly inappropriate, but I always think that, like especially in last week's episode when Bob was saying some pretty disturbing things to Sheree, the way that Kenya responded to it shows to me that she is genuinely a good person. Maybe not the best communicator, maybe not the most effective communicator, but I really think that her heart is typically in the right place. And so that's why I think in a lot of ways she's like Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is extremely unlikable. And I think that his unlikability comes from his desire to be liked. And so he tries to fit in wherever he can fit in. So it means he panders to this group, that group, that group. And at the end of the day, what he's really searching for is a place to fit in and a place to be liked, which I don't think he'll ever find. So that's why I think that there's a comparison between Kenya and Donald Trump. But anyhow, this week's episode, Kenya decided to do something nice for the girls. They all went out on a boat ride, and she thought that it would be cool, being that Phaedra and Cynthia are both going through divorces at the same time, to throw a divorce party, which I personally thought was a really cute idea. And so, unbeknownst to the other girls, she got a suite, and she got, all of these sort of fun games and food and a cake, and really just wanted to show the girls that, we're supporting you as women as you go through this divorce. So Cynthia walks in, and she was slightly taken aback by everything that was going on in the suite, but she sort of played along with it. Even though you could tell that she sort of wasn't into it, she still played along with it because she knew that Kenya was coming from a genuine place. So everyone comes in, things are going great, and then in walks Phaedra. When Phaedra walked into the room, you would have thought that someone had passed gas, because the way her face, the grimace on her face, it was priceless. So she starts complaining about her stomach is hurting, about how she's not feeling good, and then she actually leaves the party. And shortly after leaving the party, she sends a text message to Portia, and basically calls Kenya out for some sort of previous interactions that she had had with Apollo. Now, this is what gets me about not just Phaedra, but just women in general, about when your man cheats. And Kenya and Apollo never consummated or actually had any sort of physical interaction, if you will. but there was some flirtation. So to Phaedra's point, I can see why she's bothered by Kenya based on the fact that Kenya was a little more than flirtatious with Apollo at one point in time. But I feel like if a woman is flirting with my man and he's not going to shut that down, it's not the woman's fault, it's my man's fault. So my bone of contention is going to be with my man and not necessarily with that woman. Yes, if she's blatantly doing it in my face, yeah, I might have to say something just because it's a respect thing. But at the end of the day, when I say something, it should be subsequent to my man having already said something. And Apollo never intervened. He never rejected the advances or the flirtation. He was on board, and you could tell that if given the opportunity to be with Kenya, he was definitely down for the ride. So I don't feel like Phaedra being upset at Kenya. I feel like her anger is misdirected. Your anger should be at Apollo. And women always lash out at the woman versus lashing out at the men who are actually the source of the torment, the source of the pain. So seeing the way that Phaedra reacted to Kenya last night was just sort of one of those moments where you just, for me personally, I just sit back and shook my head like, it doesn't make any sense to me. And like I said, I don't want to completely invalidate Phaedra's position because Kenya is definitely wrong for the whole flirtation thing. But at the end of the day, they had both sort of reconciled those issues, moved forward from them. And so for Phaedra to decide to dredge them back up at a later date and time just really didn't make any sense to me. And I think that to a large degree, and I know people are going to disagree with me, I think a lot of it stems from jealousy. You know, you can say what you want to say about Kenya, but Kenya is a beautiful woman to me. Not into girls, not my thing, but I can still recognize beauty in another woman. And I think she's a very pretty woman. And I think that sometimes her presence may be off-putting for some women just based on the fact that she's an attractive woman and men are going to look. So I think that Phaedra, and I think Phaedra's pretty too. I don't want to, basically turn her into chopped liver. However, when comparing Phaedra to Kenya, Kenya just, her presence is so much stronger. She's taller. She's going to command more attention than a Phaedra would in a room. And I think that that's intimidating for a lot of women. And I think that that has a lot to do with maybe why Phaedra is uncomfortable in the presence of Kenya. So anyhow, they get into an exchange. Kenya, when Phaedra leaves, Kenya actually goes to her room and asks to talk to her and sort of tries once again to reconcile and to bring some sort of closure to, the things that were happening between the two of them. Phaedra wanted Phaedra wanted no parts of Phaedra wanted no parts of Kenya's apology, so the exchange just grew more and more acrimonious. Ultimately, the climax was them just agreeing that, look, it is what it is, and they walked away. Kenya left, and that's pretty much where they left it. But I hope that moving forward, like at some point, the producers over at Bravo are going to have to do something different. Like, we need some new some new villains, some new protagonists, some new antagonists, because I mean this is getting a little redundant. This, we're friends one day, we're not friends. I'm going to be friends with this group for a little while, then I'm going to find a reason to not be friends with them so I can be friends with this group. So this back and forth of who's friends with who, like this sort of this game of chess that they're playing with the friendship is it's a little redundant for me. And if that's going to be the nature of the beast in terms of the reality TV game, then it's time to change the players. I can only watch Kenya and Phaedra break up and make up so many times before it just gets old for me. So let's see what else happened last night. That was interesting. Oh, well, there was an exchange between Cynthia and Peter. The two of them are getting divorced. And it's interesting, too, because this entire time, I was of the impression, and maybe it's just me as a woman, I was of the impression that Peter was really the one who wanted the divorce. And so last night, it really became abundantly clear to me that, Cynthia was actually sort of the facilitator of their divorce and the one who was really, really on board with it, and Peter was not. When you hear all the rumors of him cheating and infidelity and so on and so forth, In my mind, she was just a woman who had had too much, but I guess it wasn't just about the cheating. If there was cheating, I don't know that that's ever been substantiated. But apparently, Cynthia just came to the conclusion that she's just not made for marriage, which is, I think that's a great epiphany. That's a great point to come to in your life when you realize, look, I'm just not marriage material. You know, in 2017, there are so many new models for what a relationship is. There's open relationships, there's polyamorous relationship, there's friends with benefits. I mean, like, at this point, there's a buffet in terms of what your relationship structure could be, and or whatever you want it to be. So I think it's great if you can come to the conclusion that, because I think it's better to understand what your deficiencies are than to keep getting involved and then hurting people. So if you know from the beginning that you're not going to be loyal, you're not going to be faithful, that you don't fit into this conventional standard or this conventional mode or model for relationships, and you keep aligning yourselves with people who believe that that's who you are and that's what you want, and then you wind up damaging these people over time, I think that that's a very cold and callous thing to do. And I always tell people, hurt passes, deception lingers. So if you just tell a person who you are and what you want up front, if you're never going to be loyal, if you're never going to be a one woman man, a one woman woman, or if you just cannot be beholden to one person, then tell people that up front, because sometimes people are afraid to tell you who they are because they don't want to be judged, and you're afraid to tell them who you are because they don't want to be judged. And so you both wind up being who you think you should be for the other person, as opposed to being who you really are, and finding someone who's okay with you being who you are. So having seen Cynthia come to that conclusion last night, I thought it was a really cool moment, not just but for female empowerment, because oftentimes as women, we're afraid to leave marriages, afraid to embark on this journey of singledom, because especially at a certain point in age, very often women are sort of discounted because they're no longer perceived as desirable. So for Cynthia to be, I believe Cynthia's around 50, or approaching 50, for her to be that comfortable in who she is, to say, look, I don't give a damn what society says. I don't give a damn about the conventional models that have been modeled for me. I'm going to make my own path. I'm going to choose my own destiny. And my destiny is one that does not include marriage. So, there were some really interesting scenes between Cynthia and Peter that I thought were pretty powerful last night. Anyhow, you guys, I don't want to talk your ear off, not that I already haven't. If you haven't checked out the episode this week, please do, and make sure you tune in for next week, because the previews between Kenya and Matt, he said some very some very shocking things that I was just like, wow. So yeah, make sure you tune in next week. As always, in closing, remember to live better, love harder, and think smarter. It is me, the Cerebral Diva.